Good morning. This is Dishha Bagchi for ThePrint, and we're back with Lieutenant General Retired HS Panag to discuss his column from this week. Army mustn't become a glorified police force. It's time to reset its mission in Manipur. Welcome back, General. Thank you for being here.
Disha, it's always a pleasure, and I'm glad that I'm back after a gap of nearly 2 months since we last spoke.
So in this week's column, you explore the challenges the army is currently facing in the ongoing ethnic conflict in Manipur over the past 3 months, given the lack of clarity on the center's plan to reinstate peace in the region. So given this current circumstance, where does this leave the army, and why do you think it's unlikely that laws such as the Armed Forces Special Powers Act and Article 355 will be adopted?
You see, first of all, there are political reasons. Because the government in power in Manipur is a BJP government, and the party BJP also rules, at the center, and they have been propagating the double-engine sarkar. So it would look politically very bad for the BJP if they impose Armed Forces Special Powers Act and declare Manipur to be a disturbed area. That's the primary reason. The second reason is that normally in the past we have been associating the application of Armed Forces Special Powers Act and disturbed areas when we are dealing with secessionist insurgencies like in Nagaland, Mizoram, and in Punjab, in Jammu and Kashmir. At this juncture, the two players who are involved in an ethnic conflict, none of them is seeking secessionism from India in any manner. So it's an internal strife. So that's another reason why the center does not want to probably impose the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. But primarily, it's a political decision that the party in power, both at the center and the state, doesn't want to look bad in the eyes of the public that it has had to declare a disturbed area in one of its own states and impose Armed Forces Special Powers Act.
In your column, you call the situation in Manipur unique. So what makes this situation unique, and how has the lack of a clearly defined mission affected the army's role in the state?
See, like I just mentioned, that at this juncture, there are 3 communities in Manipur. The Metis, the Kuki-Zo people, and the Nagas. Earlier, they were all involved in secessionist insurgencies over the last 30, 40 years, in one form or the other. Now, secessionism as such is absent. The Metis, insurgents, they just disappeared or merged with the population and no longer relevant. Kuki-Zo insurgents have signed an agreement with the government in 2008, and so have the Nagas beginning 1997, and various peace agreements, and the final peace accord 2015 is still under active consideration and finalization. The strife is internal for the larger share of the benefits of the state in terms of declaration as scheduled tribes and so on, or reservations, etc. So it's an ethnic strife. It is not a secessionist insurgency. Now, in this, while the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which was in vogue in whole of Manipur, it has been revoked over the last 2 years in 19 police stations, which are primarily in the Imphal Valley. In the hills, both in the Naga areas of the hills and at the Kuki-Zo areas of the hills, it is still applicable. So here it has been removed. Now the employment of the army is in aid of civil power. It has been requisitioned by the state in aid of civil power to assist in maintenance of law and order. In such a situation, the army has to function within the under the civilian authority, and it can only take action, open fire to quell an unlawful assembly or any other action under the orders of a magistrate. A magistrate has to accompany the column of the army. If there's an unlawful assembly, it is only when the magistrate hands over the situation to the army that you can open fire. So it is not that the army has got no scope to act independent. Yes, there is a provision for quelling unlawful assembly without the presence of a magistrate, but that is a special provision. This entire procedure is covered in the Criminal Procedure Code from sections 129 to section 132. So this is how the army is being employed in Manipur. On the other hand, the belligerents are not traditional communal mobs, who used to get dispersed once army took, action, used minimum force for effect. Here they are, both sides are heavily armed. The Metis have looted the arms from the armories, and in the Kukizo belt, probably the erstwhile insurgents who were in the under the agreement of there was an agreement of the prevention of hostilities agreement, which was in vogue. There were loosely guarded camps. Probably the arms have become available from there. In any case, they are being smuggled from Burma. So both sides are heavily armed. And it's not an ordinary mob. And in particular, the Metis mobs in the valley are in two parts. One part is the mob, which is led by the women. They act to impede the operations of the army, prevent it from moving out, prevent it from safeguarding villages, block it. And then there are the insurgents, or rather, the armed sections which are operating behind this mob, who deal in killings and arson of the other community. Now, this is mostly being done by the Metis, but maybe there are no such reports, but maybe the Kukizo may be resorting to similar actions in their own areas. But there are no such reports existing. So in this situation, it is very difficult for the army to function. They said, as per reports, there are 36,000 central forces which are operating there.
Yes.
There are 125 companies of the Central Armed Police Forces, and we have 22 battalions out of, say, even if 10 are guarding the border with Myanmar, there are 10 available here. And then there are 3 brigades of the 57 Division, and Assam Rifles and the 57 Division, of course, operate under 3 corps. There are more than adequate forces, but there is no, in the current manner in which they are being employed, without central coordination, without clear-cut rules of engagement.
Yeah.
Now, how can the state find 170 magistrates to accompany the 170 columns which have been reported of the army to be operating in the area? In fact, there are no reports. Army itself has been reluctant to open fire because most of the mobs are led by women, and this is why it is impinging on its credibility.
Yeah.
Because as per Army's own rules of engagement, it is supposed to open fire, use minimum force for effect. There are no ifs and buts there. It is minimum force for effect, and minimum force means kinetic force. That means you fire. Army does not negotiate. It does not fire in the air. Those are police methods. So Army itself is facing this problem. It is reluctant to fire on the mobs of women who are facing them. The police is ineffective or are assisting the mobs, are abetting. They are partisan. Their conduct is partisan. Then on this thing that negotiations with the mob, army doesn't negotiate with the mobs. Army is supposed to use fire for effect.
Yeah.
So how is the magistrate handing over the situation to the army? How is the army taking action? It's all in a state of confusion. That means the army is not allowed to function, and it is functioning as a glorified military, a police force, which is the theme of my article. This is why this situation is unique, and it needs a resetting of the mission of the army.
Right. So you mentioned how, given the unique circumstance in Manipur, the army has been moving away from its expected rules of engagement in such missions. So what are the repercussions of the army now moving away from these so-called rules of engagement? What are these rules of engagement also, if you could elaborate on that?
You see, firstly, we have faced mobs of women before also. We have faced them in Jammu and Kashmir. We have handled them. And the way of handling is very simple. That you either avoid the mobs, the way you conduct operations, you do not do it in a blatant manner that the mobs get ready and start opposing you. Okay, you do it based on precise information and operate in a surgical manner, so that the mobs are not able to intercept you. That was one. Second is that the mobs were dealt with by the police, by the central paramilitary forces. Army never got involved with the mobs as such. And as a last resort, if required, then fire was opened. And even in Manipur, the Assam Rifles have a long history of dealing with the mobs of women. But because of in the current situation, the police is ineffective. I don't think the magistrates are present on the ground. So suddenly, and the army has not been taking adequate precautions, I also feel, and suddenly there are armies faced up with mobs of women, call it inefficiency, call it reluctance, or call it what the army has been said that it is our human face. It has failed to act as per the rules of engagement, which are categoric, sacrosanct. It is unlawful assembly will be dispersed with minimum force used for effect. Fire for effect using minimum force, whatever way you like to put it. This in any other place in India, the actions of the army to quell an unlawful assembly brought about finality in this manner. Now, in Manipur, it is not bringing about finality. In fact, it's creating more problems. That once you do not open fire, it encourages these mobs. They have started checking identity cards of the people. They are trying to see whether the columns have got cookies or soldiers, and so on and so forth. They have been blocking the supplies of the army, and they are impeding the movement of the army. The credibility of the army is at stake, and this will have repercussions in other states too. How will you justify that you failed to act in Manipur and you opened fire in the state of Haryana? After all, we had the Jat agitation just about 5, 6, 7 years back, or anywhere else in India, in a communal riot. I mean, supposing a communal riot is led by women, so it will lower the army. It has lowered the army's credibility. It is no longer the instrument of last resort. That means it's become like a glorified police. That's the last thing we want the army to be called. Army has to bring about finality when used in aid of civil power. That is why I advocate that either we should reset the army's mission, or the army should be removed from areas where such actions are taking place.
Right. So you mentioned the threat to the army and the Assam Rifles' credibility in this situation. And you also mentioned that there have been campaigns to discredit the Assam Rifles. So why do you think there have been these attempts? What do you think people are trying to get from this?
What has happened is that, especially in the Imphal Valley, the state administration is partisan. It is, in fact, assisting the mobs. and there are many instances of this. There are these paramilitary organizations of the Métis, which are supported by the state, and the police has been seen to be assisting the states, and it's now much recorded that the women who were assaulted and paraded, they were actually snatched from the police or handed over by the police to the mob. So the police is ineffective. The Central Armed Police Forces operate under the Director General of Police of the state. They do not generally try to operate independently. Now, the armed forces, by nature, have by their ethos and by their law and rules, regulations, always act in a neutral manner and an impartial manner. So, since the army acts as the impediment to the whatever the ethnic community, particularly the Métis, want to do in terms of arson, killings, and all, especially in the border areas bordering the Kukizo areas. So it is acting as a neutral force. It's stopping them. So that is why the army is popular. And consequently, since it's protecting the Kukizo by default from the Métis, so the Métis are accusing the army that they are assisting the Kukizo people. In fact, so much so that there is a concerted campaign to discredit the Assam Rifles. All the BJP MLAs, 33 of them, have written to the Home Minister that the Assam Rifles should be removed from the state. And this demand has been made by other political elements also. So a neutral force is being discredited. And of course, there is a long history because Assam Rifles has been involved in this area in controlling the insurgencies which were of this thing. So any force which controls the insurgencies, obviously, certain amount of collateral damage takes place. There are wild acquisitions also. We remember the famous Manorma case and the 12 women, who stood naked and with a placard, the Indian Army rape us, that happened, almost 2 decades back. So there is a history, but at the same time, in balance, Assam Rifles or the army always remains neutral and acts as per the constitution, which draws no distinction between people on basis of religion or ethnicity of that kind. So it is this reason why the Assam Rifles, or for that matter, the army, is unpopular with the Métis in particular, because it is acting as a neutral force to stop both the communities from fighting.
After looking at the entire circumstance in Manipur and the army's role, you also look forward in what this conflict is going to look like in the future. So, and you suggest that the army in this case review its mission in the state. So what do you think will be the result of such a review?
Ideal is that this Manipur must be declared a disturbed area, and army should be given the lead role. It does not mean that we are not operating under the civil authority. Even if the civilian government is there, chief minister is there, you do not have to impose 356 to impose Armed Forces Special Powers Act. As I mentioned, it is only 19 police stations, which are mostly in Imphal Valley, that it has been removed. It remains in vogue in the entire Naga areas as well as the Kukizo areas, right? So best is to impose it. But what happens when once the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is imposed and the disturbed area is declared a disturbed area, is that the minute-to-minute control over the army, as it happens when it is requisitioned for maintenance of law and order, ceases. There is no requirement of a magistrate. Army can act as per the guidelines of the, sort of united council which is established under the chief minister or the governor. It is called the Unified Command Authority, which is established, and it gives the broad guidelines to the army, and thereafter the army has got freedom to act, and its operations cannot be interfered with. Like what happened in the instance on 5th August, when the army stopped a column of the police from proceeding to the Kukizo areas of police commandos, for which the police lodged an FIR. And there were reports that the checkpost, the army was, SAM rifles were removed, and the paramilitary forces were placed there. Such things do not happen then once the disturbed area is declared and the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is invoked. So keeping this in mind, even if the government does not impose the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, then the best solution is that the army and the Assam rifles must be removed from the Imphal Valley, where the problems are occurring, where there are confrontations with the army of the mobs. It is not so in the Kukizo area. So they should be removed from there. This area must be handed over to the Central Armed Police Forces, who operate under the Chief Minister. But there is a requirement to run the writ of the state that the population must be disarmed. In fact, this will test the Chief Minister himself, that with the police and the paramilitary forces, how much control does he have over his own community, whether he can disarm and get back the 4,500 weapons, as well as the 500,000 rounds of ammunition which have been stolen or handed over to the Betis. The army in such an environment can man the buffer zone, where probably in most of the cases the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is still invoked, and it can look after the Kukizo areas, where also it will have to disarm the population and reimpose the sanctity of the camps of the erstwhile Kukizo insurgents, which as I told you, were loosely guarded, and probably those are the arms which are being used by them and by the public for fighting the ethnic war. So in this manner, the army will continue to operate in areas where the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is in vogue. It will have its tactical operations will not be interfered with, and it will not be faced with the mobs in a manner as it has been facing. But if it does face, then the mobs should either be handled by the Central Armed Police Forces, or army should handle them as per its sacrosanct rules of engagement. That is,
right,
use minimum force for effect. Right. So this is a via media which I have suggested. If we carry on in a state of drift, as we have been doing, the army's credibility is getting eroded by the day, and it becomes a glorified police, and no longer which can be manipulated by the politicians, because it is operating. It's all its actions in aid to civil authority can be controlled through the magistrate or otherwise by the orders. So it will lose its credibility and become a glorified police force, which doesn't augur well. It will set a bad precedence for rest of the nation, where tomorrow, faced with a similar situation, other places we will be caught up in a similar kind of mess that we are in Manipur. So this is how, even if you do not impose the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, declare Manipur as a disturbed area, you can still reset the army's mission to prevent its erosion of its credibility.
So do you think in this situation, the center will step in to protect the army's credibility?
I think I have no doubts that the army must have apprised the government and given the advice. If it has not done so till now, then it must do so. it must not get caught in a kind of situation that it got caught when it released 12 terrorists and handed them over to a MLA of the ruling party, who himself is accused under the Prevention of Unlawful Activities Act. There's a long-standing case against him, which is there. So we handed over, I think that was one incident. Then, of course, the FIR that has been lodged. So army must have advised the government, and I have no doubts that the government can take action accordingly, that restrict the army to areas where the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is invoked, and rest of the place can be handled by the paramilitary and the police, and let the chief minister prove his credibility and his administration, that he can handle and disarm the Meitei community.
Right. Well, thank you, General. I think you brought up some very interesting points and gave us some very interesting insights on the inner workings of the armies and the army's current role in Manipur and the challenges it is facing, whether it may be its credibility as well as its overall functioning in the state, and where, how can this situation be improved. So for viewers interested in reading the full article by General Panag, the link to it is in the description below. Thank you, and we will see you next week.